Good morning or good afternoon. Thank you for choosing Right CNC. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the cable chain setup. Let's go ahead and talk about how each of these things integrate with each other. And we're going to talk about a little bit of the assembly of the cable chain. Now, as you can tell here, each of these cable chain are made up of individual pieces that, with accordance to the photo, can be popped. And you can pop all of the tops of these. Now, we currently have our cable running on the inside of our system. It's a very popular way to do it, but by another token, let me go ahead and see if I have another variation here. I do. Okay, here's a good example. As opposed to another way that you could have it is you could actually have it strapped to the outside of this system. Now, if you don't want to have to take every single one of these apart, I mean, that is the recommended way to actually assemble one of these, is to pull these apart and then insert the cable. However, if you do not feel like doing that, you can always put this cable on the outside. And because of the width of each of the cables, so because of the width of each of the connection heads, you will be able to then thread this connection head one at a time through this cable chain without having to take it apart, and all the way to this control box. So you can feed each cable one at a time through to get it into the control box. However, as I stated before, the recommended way is to take it apart and feed it through. You're going to have two segments. One segment goes across the x-axis. That's this piece that we're looking at right here. And we have one that goes across the y-axis. This is a 4x8 version, so it's a longer cable track that sits along the y-axis, where we have our secondary set of cables running alongside that run to our plasma cutter. Now let's talk about the assembly from the ground up and the pieces that you get. Initially, when you set up your table, you'll receive these brackets. These brackets are here to mount and make sturdy the gantry system. It's a gantry support, but they also come with 3 holes on the front of it. This allows us to mount the cable track tray system onto the actual table. So what you're going to need to do is to ensure that those particular C brackets are then attached to the table. And for the 4x8 system and the 5x10 system, you should have a total of 4 pieces along the y-axis. This is so that, and here's a good example, this is so that this cable tray, this bent cable tray, can lock onto each of these pieces, so on and so forth. So, once you have your table level and square, you're going to use self-tapping bolts to attach these particular C-clamps onto the gantry system here. Now, we do want to make sure that when we are squaring and leveling, we're squaring based off of this particular bend here. We want to make sure that it's all square off of the inside of this bend to the inside of the bend on the opposite side. And then we're going to attach these 2 bolts, self-tappers, into place on the axis, on the y-axis rail on the side that the cable track goes on. Now, the cable track, based on the construction of the support system here, should be going on the left side of the table. If this is the front, this is the left side here. So ensure that that's the case as you're setting it up. So there are 1/4-20 bolts down here that are then screwing into the C bracket. 2 1/4-20 bolts per tray, per side of the tray, 4 bolts in total per tray segment, and then of course 2 trays for the 4x8, 1 tray for the 4x4. Once those are attached, you'll take a series of longer, thinner bolts that come in that pack, push them through the 2 series of holes here, down through to the bottom of this cable track end piece, and then it's bolted underneath, tightened up against this cable track tray. Again, 4 bolts passing through the top of this system, locking this piece on here. Now we do want to make sure, as we were speaking before that, we want to make sure that all of the major wires that we decide, whether or not we decide to run the thick wire through here or not, we want to make sure that our wires are already run through the cable before we mount it to the table. You will run it from here, from the actual top of the Z-axis, down through to this junction here. So the X and the Z and the floating head, so the micro switch, will all get channeled through this cable track to this point. So the 3 cables coming off the Z-axis come through to this point here. The Y-axis has 1 motor on the opposite side. That motor wire is actually run through the gantry, and it comes out over through here. This is that cable. And then you have the 1 cable coming from this motor here. And then these will join with the rest of the wires in through the rest of this cable track management system. So again, I'll reiterate, all of the wires coming off of this X-axis here moves through the top cable track and moves through this junction here. The Y-axis motor on the opposite side is then having its wire run through the gantry to this Y-axis motor on this side, where these 2 then join in this junction and hop into this cable track all the way down to our table. Make sure that it's run this way in order to allow for the greatest ease of motion as you're working with the cable track system. Mounting the X-axis cable track tray can be tricky. And we want to make sure that we're not impeding the motion of this X-axis carriage. So let me get onto this other side here so we can see exactly what's going on. Now your cable track tray might look slightly different. It may or may not have these holes involved. We align the cable track tray to the underside of this gear track. We want to get it as close as possible so that we have freedom of motion when we move this carriage back and forth. We want to make sure that this is as close to the underside of this gear track. Same thing on this opposing side, as close to the underside or level with the underside of the gear track here, and same thing about as level as we can get to the underside of the gear track over here. And there's a couple of different ways you can mount it. The way that we've chosen to mount it here is a series of self-tapping bolts here. You can also start with a small drill point and then introduce self-tappers to it in order to make your life simpler, but this is the way that we do it here, and it's the recommended way. However, coming from me personally, I would take a drill, pop 2 guide holes in there, get some self-tappers, and then pop those through to finalize and lock this cable track tray onto the X-axis. So you're going to be placing 6 bolts onto here in order to make sure it's locked, making sure that, of course, the side with this crook and bend is on the same side as your Y-axis cable management system. Everything positionally is going to be determined by this cable track tray. Once all of the cable track trays are in place, once all of the wires have been fed through, as we started on that end, we put our 4 bolts there. We're also putting a series of 4 bolts here. 4 bolts all the way through from the inside here, just ensuring that we're getting it properly secured to this system for easy motion. Same thing here. There are 4 bolts here that secure this end of the cable track tray on the X-axis, secure this end of the cable track to the cable track tray for the X-axis. There is on the X-axis motor carriage a bracket that extends off of it that has 4 bolt holes for the X-axis cable track. Now I want you to note the configuration. We actually have a gap. We have a gap built into the system to allow some flexibility when working with this wire, as binding can cause issues with motion, and we want to make sure that we have fluid motion across the table. So take that into consideration when working with it. Make sure that it's secured and tight. We use two nuts on this side to make sure that we aren't going to get this and pull this off mid-motion, but we do have flexibility of motion vertically in order to allow no pressure to be really applied to the X-axis carriage and cause any inaccuracies in motion. And I will also mention this while you're assembling this, while all of this is being put into place, I do want you to make sure that down at the bottom of the Z-axis, there's a hole there listed right in the middle. Our current tables here in the shop don't carry these bolts, but it is recommended that all of the customers who currently have our tables do start to carry that bolt, as we've made some changes to our systems. If you don't have that bolt there, as we do not have that here, please give us a call. We can definitely help you fix that situation and give you some bolts with the proper gear, with the proper bearing, in order to make sure that you're running correctly. That being said, you have all of your gear track, cable track mounted to your table. Go ahead and test and move the table around for fluidity, making sure that you do have clean and clear motion without binding, moving, stretching, or any change in position of the Z or X axis. And that should get you settled up for a successful run with cable track on a Wright CNC table. We'll be putting together a larger and more formal step-by-step video as time permits, and as we have the opportunity here to get that out to you. It'll also all be available on the customer portal. There are written instructions and a sample video of what it should look like also available on the customer portal. And we are doing a current overhaul of the portal, so please bear that in mind as we are upgrading all of our systems to reflect all of the changes that we've made to the Wright CNC 2019 version of the table. In any case, have a good day, and we will talk soon. Thank you.